Connecting Conversations. I am your co-host, Evelkah.
I'm Carla. I'm so happy that you're here with us for another conversation. We're about to get into it.
Yes, and I think like we said during previous podcasts, we use these sessions as more of a therapy, chit chat, catch up sometimes. Just so we can share our thoughts and our ideas, and hopefully it would either help to inspire you, give you some advice, or provide a space of reflection and food for thought going forward. So we really want these spaces to be safe spaces. But there've been some conversations that we've had over, the last 50 odd episodes that we've done in 2024, which is incredible. But there's one thing that we quite haven't touched on, and that is the question, or is it even a question, the topic around age and how that is presented in today's world. Because I think when I look back, I have my parents from a different generation where my mom got married at a really young age, at the age of 19. And the thought of me getting married at 19 in today's world is just different story. I just couldn't even dream of being married at that age. I didn't even know who I was, first of all. But we've seen how this concept of age has transformed and has been given different meanings over different generations. But also we've seen the access age has either provided or not provided across time. So as some of you may or may not know, there is an age gap between you and I. Is it about 12, did we say?
I think so. I think about 12 years, yeah.
Even though, it doesn't feel like that. There are some times...
That's because Evelkah is a very old soul.
Yeah, I do consider, internally, I'm probably closer to her age than I am to mine. But...
I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
I don't know either. I question that every single day. I look at some of my peers and I'm just like, I'm definitely not like that. But then I look at my older peers and I'm just like, I don't think I'm quite like that
either. Yeah.
So I feel like I'm a little bit in the middle, but nevertheless, I think, and maybe that's another concept over generations, especially the generation I'm from, did we have to grow up a lot quicker or become more mature because of life? Yeah. When my mom was growing up, she possibly didn't have the need to be as independent or as mature and could just enjoy, childhood and teenage life. But I think over the years, due to the evolution of life and how societies have become, it has kind of forced us in some situations, I'm not saying all, to be older and approach situations in a more mature way than we ever have done in the past.
I think so, yeah.
I don't know how that resonates with you.
For sure. I think you raise a really good point there. I think when I think about also, my mom got married at 21. And every time I look at pictures, you're literally a child bride. You look so young. I'm just like, do you know? She's like, I didn't even know who I was at that time. Just the thought of that now. I'm just like, I remember when I was 21, I still had a mentality of I was still 17 in my head. It was crazy. And I knew that. The self-awareness was very real.
Yeah.
But also I think you're talking about, is it because they just had different expectations? I think life expectations were so different. The requirement for education, the requirement for independence quickly, I think particularly for women, was very different just one generation ago. My parents' era. But even in saying that, we're also, I think you mentioned about have we been forced to grow up sooner here? I think it's one thing to be forced to grow up sooner, but also life and the way that the world is now, you have so many multi-generational, just cohorts all occupying the same space in business, in the workplace, in society, in everybody's game. You don't be like, well, and you hear how actually with that comes the reality of we're kind of at odds with each other. When you've got so my generation, I think with the millennials, I was just looking at this, each one is just distinguished between certain decades of either the 80s and where in the 80s you were. So I'm part of the millennials. And just hearing, I think for me, I probably cradled the line between just that previous generation and the one that we're living in now. So I still have the concepts in my early growth and early education, or early concepts that were, passed down to me, came from some maybe more traditional values.
Yeah.
I didn't have a mobile phone until I was 18, and it was that Nokia thing. You couldn't get on the internet with it. There wasn't a mad thing about how social media occupies phones now, rather than it was just a phone that was a tool to make sure that actually you had more safety and you had the ability to communicate and keep in contact with people rather than wait for a landline phone call or write a letter. That was still my era, people having pen pals in school.
Wow.
So that was it. And then I got my first one at 18, wasn't really interested. And then only when I got into uni, it was a flip phone. Again, not like using the internet. And then also just that there was some traditional ideas in terms of, people, if it's broken, you fix it, not just get a new one. And the disposability that we're so much more acquainted with in a microwave society, because it's a click of a button and it changes. Back then, processes were longer. So that means you have to endure one step to another, whether it's progression in education or in job finding or in building relationships. It was a longer process. So I think the value was slightly different, whereas now we see it's a little bit more consumer based. It's a little bit more transitory. If not, I'm going to dare to say it's sometimes in some areas quite transactional. So I was exposed in my upbringing that this was an expectation from a generation that always functioned like that for like decades before I got there, only to be met with this new wave in my 20s, like from university onwards, like, no, life is getting faster. It's like, it's moving so, like, this world is fast for me. I know that from my parents' era, like, this world is like, they don't even know what's going on sometimes because it's so fast. But then also those that are living in this fast pace, I see just like how much it's not really been always
beneficial.
The most beneficial. It's burning people out. It's exploiting youth. It's making children vulnerable to terrible things. There's no safeguard in the expanse of how much just like this has been thrust upon them, and now they don't have the cognitive ability of like a 30-year-old that might have the ability, or 25-year-old can make some critical thinking decisions about recognizing what's safe, what's not safe. You can see how detrimental that is, but that's the only world that they know. When you ask them about, do they know about when certain legislation came in that's really like influence our society, they're like, it's always been like that. It's like, no, this has only been here for 10 years. But 10 years ago, you were 5. Do you see what I mean? So of course they can't, this is it. This is the world. So, and I think even the concept, like going back to what we wanted to talk about, is just like, what does it feel like? Like this idea of like aging or getting older in this era from someone that comes from my side of the millennials generation in comparison to yours. I imagine it's got very different expectations. So I'd love to hear from your side. You are newer. and I think the most recent engager of like that. And I will talk about how different that probably has been for me.
I think, to be honest, I found out just recently that I'm part of the Gen Zs.
You are my friend. Sorry.
So I really tried to think that I wasn't, but I'm at the upper end. So I'm literally the oldest of the Gen Z generation. But what was interesting when I was looking or considering my concept on livelihood is
right.
I was also in the balance between, because I'm the oldest of the Gen Zs and it was the millennials just before me, I was also in that mix where I saw, growing up, I spent a lot more time outdoors than I did indoors. Like, I actually learned how to ride a bike. I was out playing in dirt in the Caribbean.
Played outside every day, same.
Literally, I was going to the beaches. Luckily, in the Caribbean, we're close to the beaches, so we actually had great fun being outdoors. So I grew up doing a lot of outdoor, like flying kites with my dad and
so good.
Playing cricket. These were the things that filled my childhood and in my early teenage life. And unlike you, I actually got my phone a little bit earlier. I think I was about maybe 11-ish.
What?
11, 12.
Not in my lifetime, my friend. No way.
I think I was about 11, 12, or maybe even 13 that I got my first phone, and it was a Conker. I can't forget.
They were so heavy, weren't they?
Like, it was a Conker. It was a flip phone. It was the most basic flip phone. It didn't have any internet, but I could make text messages and make calls, which was fun. And I had to try and sneak it in my room after bedtime and put it underneath my pillow, thinking my mom thinks I'm asleep. I'm literally texting all my friends. I have got caught a number of times. I wasn't that sly. But that was the generation. And then, you know, that's when YouTube also became quite a thing. So me and my cousin used to make dance videos to YouTube music and things like that. So for me, I did benefit from the fact of being outdoorsy, but also having the privilege of the internet access when things were becoming more and more connected and we were living in a more interconnected world. And that's kind of evolved over the years. And then eventually we moved to the UK, which kind of put me into a whole new landscape of connectivity and what does it mean to be a 15, 16-year-old in an expansive country in access to, you know, different opportunities. And I think at that point, I grew up a lot quicker because I had access to more things compared to, I think, age and how we, I guess, relate to age in the Caribbean and here was very different. So back home, I still felt like a child. Whereas in the UK, I still felt, I started to feel more of an adult and, you know, have more privilege because, you know, you can walk to school on your own. Back home, my mom used to drop me to school and pick me up. We had the privilege of going home for lunch and coming back. You don't have that in the school systems here. And so, you know, I was speaking to a parent just the other day. She was an Uber driver, bless her. And she said, like, you know, parents would let their kids walk to and from school at the age of like 8, 9. And I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
So in the UK, I found that, you know, you kind of grew up a lot quicker because of your access to so many things, and the public transport here is pretty reliable.
Yeah.
So I think you had the opportunity to do more and be more independent. But I would say I was on that curse, similar to you, in between both generations as to what life and what age relevant things I was exposed to and certain things that I was not. But what I would say is it really amplified when I started working, because there you can either be in environments where people look down on you because of your age, and specifically for me because I was younger, or you kind of adopt a more leadership kind of approach, which allowed people to question, you don't really come across as, you know, 18 or 20 or 21, because I think I adopted that kind of independent and mature and leadership approach to the way in which I did things. However, that did come in conflict with other people who were much older. I remember there was one time I was leading a team, I got promoted, and I was leading a team of 8 people, and one of the persons in that team was around the 40-year mark, and she was not happy that I was her team leader at all. She absolutely hated it, to the point she took me to HR.
Wow.
Yeah. Just because I was older and she felt like I wasn't deserving.
She was older, you were younger.
She was older and I was younger, and she felt like I wasn't deserving of that position. So she made a lot of, you know, false remarks, complained to HR about things that wasn't true or was completely taken out of context. And in the end, she said to me, to my face, like, I should be in a leadership position. I am 40-something years old and I should be a manager. And I'm just like, I didn't realize age was a prerequisite for a certain position, love.
I mean, I love that you've gone there, because I think for a long time now, especially I think the generations before, your age automatically, the respect your elders thing was a long-term thing. Now we're in a society, it's like, actually, if you've got the skill set, we will submit to it.
Yeah.
And that carries weight and authority. In saying that, though, I think there's still room for respect for elders, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be able to beat someone that's got 25 years experience on life.
Yeah.
Not necessarily my skill set or my expertise. I think that's something that's quite different. But in terms of just in life, does not automatically make you a leader in the room. It doesn't automatically warrant the fact that you should be regarded as the person who leads.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, it doesn't automatically mean that they've got what it takes to actually steer a project or be someone that can manage everybody else in the room. If that's not actually what you're capable of doing, just because you're older doesn't qualify that.
Yeah.
I would think I was in this, I think I've balanced both.
Okay.
More to do with like, I feel like there's younger people, like if they've got it, but I don't know if that's a personal cultural upbringing.
Okay.
But I say cultural in terms of, I think that was like in my family that taught me to be that way, not from the cultural ethnic background that I came from, because I think there's a more of like, I'm your elder, I know what's happening and you don't. And my parents would be like, you need to question that. Just because someone says that, like, question the authority. Why are they there in place? Is that really the best thing for the job?
Yeah.
So I think I've kind of grown up with that. So now I don't feel like I've got an issue. Like, for example, even in our dynamic, you are the managing director of our company. I'm very happy to sit in the seat of where my skill set lies.
Yeah.
I've never questioned about the value that I bring per se. I'm very much like, I'm learning as we go along, but I know these are the things I can bring to the table.
100%.
And I've never been like, I'm not sure that I trust like somebody else that has got more experience, even if they're younger than me. I'm like, how does that quantify anything? How we get anywhere if you have that kind of concept? But in saying that, I know, particularly because we mentioned this earlier, we are occupying a society that has multi-generational cohorts literally living side by side in corporate. How do you navigate that?
And I think that's a real struggle for most companies nowadays, because they talk about it, you know, this age inclusive workplace and all of that stuff. But I think in reality, it's a challenge because we're all coming from different, you know, ideologies, way of life,
expectation.
Like there is just so many different things and points of context that, you know, they're coming from and you're coming from, that it does clash. So how do we bridge that together? And I think we have to be in this world, in this society where we now have people occupying from different generations in one. We have to be very receptive and be very open-minded.
Both ways. I don't think that I see that very often, if I'm honest. And I'm going to make some bold claims now, because
Go on.
I feel like for some generations, there is some expectation that I don't need to shift. I don't need to move. I'm entitled to do that. I see that very common with a particular generation. I'm not going to say which one it is, but I feel that's very common. But think about it. What we hear, certainly from this generation, they're a lot more informed politically.
Yeah.
They're a lot more open to cerebral self-development. They're a lot more open to things like therapy. If you propose that, or the self-awareness element to someone from a generation that's slightly older, the visceral response I have seen from that, it's been crazy. And almost how they will actually disregard it. They will look down on this generation, say like, that's not what we had in our day. I'm like, it kind of shows, because this is coming out in all these other ways that are not productive to creating a holistic environment that is helpful for people to move forward as a team. That has been an eye-opener. And like, I think for me, when I think about what you said in terms of where this is clashing, it's coming up against walls like that I have seen more often than not. And I'm like, okay, but you could stay there on your own and the rest of us will move forward. But the absolute denial, like they have to shift or they have to make adjustments. And this is not everybody, but I find it more common in some generations than in others.
No, I agree. And I think, you know, all of this is a two-way street. We can't
100%.
just do one way and expect other generations to follow suit.
Or make adjustments
around them, because I think there's a reason why all of us are in the same place at the same time. It's because there's probably a bigger worldly problem. We all need to collectively come together and bring different ideas and knowledge around, because there are people who have seen the world change through wars and stuff.
100%.
You know, we still value their knowledge and what they can bring to the table. But then we also have a newer concept of newer generations coming, being like, well, let's think about, you know, let's be a little bit more creative about this problem. Like, here are some of the resources and tools that we can do and access to enable your knowledge to come to fruition. And I think it is that bridging and that balance and harmony. I think we've touched upon this word of harmony before.
We have.
And bringing that together to ensure that we do reach our collective business goals, community goals, you know, spiritual goals, whatever it may be, we have to work together. So for me, even going back to what you said about the phrase like respect your elders, and things like that, which I do agree, we should still have,
100%.
you know, respect for our elders, but it's not just for our elders. It is a two-way street. And that's what I have now grown up with. I've, you know, especially when I went back home as an older and as an adult, you know, there are people that I question their approach and their wisdom.
Yeah.
But when I was growing up, I was told that I needed
not do that. Yeah.
You do not question.
Yeah,
You do not, or else you'll get a slap in the face.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, now that I'm older, I'm just like, now we're kind of on a similar wavelength in some way, shape, or form. Where
the self-autonomy bit.
Yeah.
That's what's on the
where I also demand respect from you.
Yeah.
I don't have to just give you respect every time and then to have you look down on me because I'm younger. Yes, I may still be younger, but now we are on a similar understanding. I deserve that respect back. So I think, you know, we need to look at things like that as a two-way street as well, because respect isn't one way. We should be respecting everyone regardless of their age. When you step into, you know, an organization or a company, there are entrepreneurs that are leading, you know, thousands of employees that are under the age of 30. And there are people who are much older working in alignment with that company. And you can't sit here and say, like, the CEO must respect the, I don't know, marketing manager just because they're older. I'm leading a multi-million-dollar pound company. I also deserve respect from you as an employee. And so I think we're getting better. All that to say, we are getting better, especially in the workplace. There is still a lot of work to be done. But I do think that age is something that is still being talked around, or people have not come to realization, shall I say, how much of an impact it can be.
I think this might be a bit controversial. It's just to maybe I raise you. We were talking about the difference, and I mentioned like why I feel the lack of adjustment around the one generation is the expectations of the others revolve around where they were. I also understand why sometimes I feel the younger generation or the most recent generations, they end up undermining themselves, which I think loses their respect in the process. And I just want to raise this was there is a balanced view.
Yeah.
Because I do think there are people from any generation that they have the self-awareness and they're like, give me something of substance that I can respect in you as a human being. There are people, I'm not saying they don't have that capability.
Yeah.
We also have to acknowledge like the older generations know what it means to be disciplined and endure. Because we live in a microwave society, we have done a disservice to young people thinking, well, it'll be fine. I'll just click onto this and become a TikTok influencer. And be a millionaire. Like people have worked for 25 years in a business before making their first million. Where were you for that? And the expectation and entitlement that it's just going to come my way. And I see this also someone that was occupying, you know, space within state education here in the UK. Like that's a really common attitude. They're right to certainly if anybody that works in education might relate to my experience in terms of there is so much expectation of teachers, but very little support sometimes, and also so much liability on your part. And what we're finding, because the way that the framework is, it's child-centered education, what we created was this expectation that they didn't have to do their part in terms of respecting. They're like, at the end of it, it's down to you to make sure I get good grades, but they were not doing their part at home, and we are parenting them. And this is something that I'm just like, that for me, this is where we see that the older generation will lack respect for younger people, because there's no self-awareness of like what you're behaving like is still like a child to think that the world is going to revolve and just work out for you this way. And you can throw a tantrum and basically your toys will be thrown out the basket, figuratively speaking, and it should all still be okay.
Yeah.
And like, why isn't it just coming my way? I click the button, it's not working.
Yeah.
Life is not like that. And you can see this even with, and I say this, not in a disregard, because I had loads of people that have found, like, for example, even, you know, dating apps, they've found their person and they're happy. But the concept of dating apps, more often than not, it's like people have become reduced to, I'm a swipe picture.
Ooh,
right?
Yeah.
There's a swipe picture. My face is disposable amongst many others. You do not pick up the essence of my person, my spirits, who I am in that interaction. You won't, because I'm on a screen. You'll just go to the next one. Swipe which way? And you're telling me this is hook up a culture that has become, as a result, like, well, what's the next one? I don't have to put up with this. I don't have to deal with myself. I'll just find someone else that will. And I'm hearing this so much more in dating circles. And these are in, some circles that this is unlikely. I thought that you would experience that there, but like across the board, even in some faith circles, even like this is a struggle. The attitude of people are disposable, I'm expecting a microwave outcome with very little input, is something that I think undermines the younger generations. And I can see where that clash is also coming, where the older ones have a concept like, you should just respect me because I'm older. But they're also coming up against like, well, young people aren't really giving me something to have confidence in, that they should automatically deserve my time, my respect, if that makes sense. Because ultimately we will say this, it's a common saying, it's not mine, respect is earned.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you don't respect another person offhand because they're a human being, 100% baseline. But we're talking about people want to be seen, valued, heard. They want to be regarded in high esteem. But we want to behave and do what we want with no consequences.
Yeah.
And that goes both ways.
Yeah.
And that is something that I feel like when we're looking at society now, this concept of getting older, I don't think it's as linear or it's not as straightforward, because I see some very interesting 40, 50-year-olds that have not quite grown out of that. And then I see some very young people, beautifully talented, have got so much potential, but the lack of character because there's no endurance requirements, because things are so quickly given over in this transactional world, that I don't know if it's even their fault, but the environment is not really set up. Unless you've got parents that are like, no, in this house, you work through your stuff.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that isn't the norm so much anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that.
I do agree to an extent, because there are young people similar in age to me, for instance, whereby they feel entitled, whereby they feel like, if I show up on a certain platform, I'm going to get X amount of money straight away. There's this expectancy of...
That's how it works.
That's how it works. In one click, I'm going to have everything that I want on a plate. But then I see it a lot more prominent in the younger side of the Gen Zs, or the new up-and-coming generation, Gen X, I think it is, where they have, everything at their disposal now. I'm not surprised that they are the way they are. So to your point, I don't think it's necessarily their fault that they want that stuff. It's because of the environment they live in. They feel like that is what it is. Yeah. So they don't know any better.
The reality for them is just so different from that previous generation.
Exactly.
So I agree with that.
So it is hard to say, like, this is how they are. And like you rightly said, like, there are also, parental influence in there and how you raise your kids. But at the same time, I don't think society and the evolution of society in a technologically advanced way has quite supported this idea of hard work. In fact, they believe, like, you can become a millionaire tomorrow. And I don't think that's... I'm going to disagree in the sense that I don't think it's necessarily a reason why the older generation should lack respect. I think even because of the environment they live in, some of them may be able to turn around to $1 million within a day, because they have more resources, aligned to them. So,
and also, can we just talk about how things like Bitcoin and Forex, like
100%,
you just have to be the right place at the right time for one deal to go really well. It's basically like winning the lottery. They didn't work loads of hours to gain that. So this world, in terms of the ability to gain wealth quickly, is way more realistic than the reality of what previous generations have had in terms of the society that they lived in.
100%.
So that, like, you're right.
So in that sense, I think, yes, we still should have, like, respect is earned, but I don't think that's a reason to take away respect from younger people because they can access wealth a lot quicker than before. Needless to say, I still don't believe, like, wealth is instantaneous. There is an element of still working for it, but also maintaining it. But I do think, like, we live in a completely different world where we can access more, or the younger generation will be able to access more, and probably even more in the future, that they will have things at their disposal that will enable them to reach certain goals or have certain things. And this might be controversial, and I'm not saying this in any way, shape or form, but I wonder if it's also a sense of anger or jealousy from the older generation that they never had access to it and they had to work so hard, and other people have had it easy, the younger generation. But on the flip side of that, that's kind of the way the world works, in the sense of, yes, you've struggled and yes, you've had this, but because of that struggle, people came up with solutions and ideas to make it easier for other people to come into the world.
I would probably disagree there. And I will say why. Because if we look at, for example, we can only speak from the UK because obviously that's where we are. But when we look at they call it the boomer generation, who bought their homes for £8,000, are now sitting pretty with 500, 600% profit that they're selling, and your generation cannot even get onto the housing market. So I don't know about, I understand what you're saying. There might be, depending on what arena that you're functioning in, what field of work you're in, I can absolutely see how that could be a perception of younger people, like, we didn't have the access to that, how is it that this works for them? But in the same breath, I'm also like, that boomer generation is probably reaping the benefits, living so much longer, of they're being able to live in a comfortable life. They've seen like the reward of when they acquired their home, the living costs were so much different. They were able to, they've paid off their mortgage and now they're selling it to someone like myself whose wages have not increased over time. Like, there's records and statistics to prove that. Now they're sitting with, I'm in a house share. I can't get onto my first property without spending hundreds of thousands of pounds, which is what, 3, 4, 5 times what my salary is. That was not the same ratio when that previous generation was getting onto the property. Like, it was simpler to acquire that. Jobs were paying more money. The living cost of like a shopping bill was completely different to what they're facing now. So when they started, that particular generation had, I think, when we talk about access to resources, I'm not even sure that's even fairly comparable. So yes, we've got a wider reach with the World Wide Web, and you can, but more people are, should I say, flooded into the industry markets with degrees that back then that equated, if you had a degree, you automatically got a job. They're competing with way wider kind of, should I say, obstacles now, or challenges now, or loopholes to jump through to find a way to be distinguished, find a way to be marketable. The competition base is wider, but also the cost of living now, because of that previous generation, is so much higher. But who's really reaping the benefit of that now? So that's a good. I think it's important to see, and that's what we're raising today, really, is just let's look at the diversity of challenges at play here. Let's look at why there's definitely kind of like coming into conflict about certain perceptions of one another as a generation. And also, what is our approach moving forward about getting older? I think young people now, I want to get rich quicker now. It looks like that's probably easier for them to do because of like, they can make money off a really good deal, whether it's an investment or they're doing some kind of Bitcoin or something. That wasn't available then. Or
being an influencer.
Like that was never something that was possible for someone to do before. But I also look at that previous generation, the ones who are like, well, this is how this is working, and I'm paying for that. And that's also like, I also see younger people think, well, that's great because you guys are not contributing to my pension in the way that I've been contributing to yours and the healthcare, and I'm now living with higher costs to bear than you ever had to experience when you were my age. Your prospects to develop and grow in career progress and wealth has been actually on the high. I've started here and I still need to compete to find a way to excel. And that's even harder because I can barely get my foot in the door. So I think having this understanding and considering both sides is super important. I think I don't hear often those from that generation looking like, I'm so sorry for that for you. I'm not hearing the sympathy there. Or the compassion of like, okay, what do we do? They're not going to give that. As far as they're concerned, they felt they've worked hard their whole life and they expected to see the increase of wealth, and now they can benefit from that. Our generation, the younger generation, because I feel like I said, I'm straddling the middle with that. And also someone who has started a new life in like late 30s, which that generation would never even dream of doing. They had spent their years in jobs to build up to where they were. Whereas we're like, okay, I'm in this job a year, in this job 2 years, and you're on to the next one. To that previous generation, I've heard many of them say, where's the loyalty?
That's the
Do you
big
see
question,
what I mean? There's like, where's the loyalty to building something? You don't have what it takes to stick it out. But actually, that's just not how, like you said, the world doesn't work like that right now. What are they going to do? They are also subject to the economic climate, how it is that they're going to find a way to get a sense of independence and a quality of life that you live quite comfortably, but for them to do that, it costs them actually a lot more.
Yeah.
Work harder. Your demands, like they were living in an era before social media, before like this World Wide Web connection, that you did your hours from 9 to 5 and no one contacted you again because there was no emails. Now people are having to work. How can I make myself more available to get favor with my boss, to find a way that if I can show myself so readily overworked that only then will I get some form of promotion? We're struggling with work-life balance and burnout and depression in young people. That's something that they never
had to deal with as vocal or
as vocal about. Let's not say that it wasn't there.
True.
But it was just a very the balance of life. It was separate. Like kids could play outside for hours, not doing homework all day to keep up with the rest of the world and the market.
Yeah, I think you're so right, because in some ways I do feel like there has been a path paved to make it easier for the younger generations in some aspects. Especially when it comes to the evolution of laws and, even from an inclusion aspect, we're seeing more people feel like they've been able to occupy spaces that they never otherwise would have. And we see a lot more women in the industry than we would have back in the day. But I do also agree to the point where, because of the evolution of life and societies, it has made it a lot more harder for the younger people to get on the ladder, whatever that may be, financially or even on the career ladder, than it did. I actually, whenever someone says, I've been in a company 20 odd years, I'm just like, oh. God forbid, you'll never catch me in a company.
God forbid!
You'll never catch me in a company for 20 odd years. I'm sorry.
So funny. Oh my goodness.
But it's true. Like, the thought of me being in a company for 20 odd years, just that one,
but I can
see me out.
Yeah, but unless it's ours and we're really building something.
Yeah, but I'm talking about working for someone else.
Different, and that's the thing. Like, people are so much bolder about it. It was a select few that took initiative about your position in society, about who determines I'm now the boss of a company. That wasn't very common. People went to a job, got a salary, and went home.
Yeah.
Now you're like, this is the era. They told us that was the way to get through life. It's not working out.
Yeah.
From a logistical level, it's not working out. It's not enough.
And that's because of the pressures of, gaining financial freedom and whatever. It has become a lot harder in this generation that we live in currently. We can't just afford to stay in a company for 20 years, because if, like you rightly pointed out, if salaries hasn't even changed, why am I staying in a company where my salary isn't increasing?
And I can't pay my bills.
Yeah. So obviously I'm going to have to jump ship and go to somewhere else to make up for, the kind of imbalance that I had previously and earn more money. And now we're also seeing this idea of side hustles and, people working more than one job than, before. Well, I say before really loosely, because we also saw in certain communities from an ethnical point of view that they were working more than one job to make ends meet because of, we all know.
But
I'm talking in terms of, the lack of inclusion in work environments and Black people, for instance, being paid less and so on and so forth back then. But what we also seen, even now, there is a lot more young people doing side hustles. They're, trying to, make additional money on the side to make ends meet. And still, like you rightly said, living in a shared house, which blows my mind. And so, yes, when we look at society and we look at how things have evolved, there are losses and wins on both sides, where the younger generation have access to more of the kind of but advancements of technology compared to the older generation. But the older generation, I believe, like you said as well, that access to wealth a lot easier than we ever had before. So we do see that clashing in work environments, where we have some managers thinking, they look at a CV, for instance, and they were just like, well, this person worked in this role for 1 year. Like, why are they looking to switch? Or you see, on the other hand, if you show that to a younger boss, they were just like, oh, this is the skill set that they bring. Yes, we want them. And so you see that difference playing out. But what you also see that people are not talking so much about is the older you're getting, and we're living on a bit longer than we have done, is those over 50 are struggling to find jobs because the loyalty they had to one job
has not diversified
their ability, and that job has went under, and so they have to open up doors in terms of looking for other jobs. I've had people who've come to me and said, I haven't updated my CV in years, 10 plus years, and I'm just like, whoa. And we see that challenge for the older generation trying to get back into our market competitive with technological skills,
which wasn't even in their remit when they were in school and in education.
Exactly.
Even when they did further or exceeding it, or like postgraduate education, it was so different how that was done. Now it's like, do you have the skill in coding?
Yeah,
that's what they're teaching in schools now. I never was anywhere near that unless you found yourself in a graduate job that is more tech focused. Yeah. I think it is like you said, the challenges are very real in terms of like, how do I still find a way to make myself marketable when now this is becoming basic skill.
Yeah.
And it's an alien language for an entire generation of people.
Yeah.
And how do I figure out, because they might have still the best creative ideas, but if they don't have these new technological methods or understanding of how that works and operates in driving the economy of it or driving the wave of marketability for it, they're still sitting there ineffective. And that's really, really hard. And I think, like you're saying, these are the elements where we can talk about how perceptions of one generation maybe look down on the other for various reasons. There are cultural perceptions about what isn't valuable. But the reality is, when you look about you also face these other challenges because of logistical, economical, educational exposure, because of the way that the world is developed. These are quite serious clashes and really serious things to, I think, both ways. I think you mentioned this earlier, need to be empathetic to one another.
100%.
Are we making room for those? Okay, so you're 50, that's got to be hard. Think about at that season of your life, you were looking to wind down, but actually for some they can't. That not everybody had necessarily the same trajectory as some of the generation where wealth was easily cost of living, and if they were able to navigate money well, it would go on a continuous trajectory upwards. The ones that weren't maybe afforded that opportunity are now in a situation where I need to find a way to navigate, because maybe they've had to migrate countries. People are moving, if their countries are in really not good spaces, they're leaving to find work elsewhere, but that means they're competing with others in this generation. Different education, it's fast paced, it's cutting edge technology, available to do stuff that do you know what it's like to work like that? To be on your phone all day, to answer every email. It's a different style and culture of work and approach. So many elements need to be considered, and I think we probably owe it to that generation firstly to make room for their skill set, but it's got to be are you willing to be humble enough to also accept we have to be able to go both ways with that? And I think this is a stark reality we see lots of people engaging with within corporate.
Oh, 100%. But we've also seen the beauty in how it works.
Yes, when it's done right.
Yeah. When it's done well, when it's done right, when it's done in a way that is inclusive and empathetic, it has and reaps really good results. So I think that is something that we should strive for. I love working with yourself from a different generation, but I also love hearing the knowledge and the perspectives from those that are over 50. It is so lovely. One of my friends was telling me she never thought that she would be really good friends with a 50-year-old. But we can learn so much from one another, and I it goes back to the common saying, age is just a number. But we all can learn, and we all can strive to have equal understanding and respect and grace for one another in these spaces where we are going to occupy more and more people from different generations. And it's not just about being prideful or being ignorant to some of these ideas and knowledge, but actually be an understanding of what it's like, but actually being receptive and accepting, shall I say, of what they offer and the value that they bring. So I think, I love having you as my bestie in business who is 10 plus years older than me, and I don't see it being a conflict between us, but I think that's because we have genuine respect and honor what we both bring to the table. So I think if there is more like that in business, in society and communities, that we occupy, I think we will actually be onto something.
I'm here for that ride. Love it. I think that's definitely the title. Is age just a number?
Is age just a number? We'll catch you next one.
See you later.